Good morning, everyone, and welcome to TechFire in association with NTT Data. My name is Niall Kitson. I'm editor of TechCentral.ie and your moderator for this morning, where we ask the burning question: is organizational resilience an IT problem? Joining us are David Tyrrell, Vice President and Country Manager at NTT Data Ireland, and Michael O'Reilly, CTO EMEA with NTT Data Ireland. Johnny Law from AIB unfortunately is unable to attend this morning due to personal reasons, for which we apologise. At registration, you had the opportunity to submit a question to the panel. We will also be taking suggestions during the discussion, all of which will be moderated. Informing this morning's session will be some local research carried out under our TechBeat brand in October. So first up, I'd like to welcome our speakers properly. David Tyrrell is Vice President and Country Manager with NTT Data Ireland. He's an experienced senior IT executive with a track record in account and program management, application management and development, IT operations and sales. He will probably disagree with me on all of that, but anyway, he is responsible for growing NTT Data's service business in Ireland with key clients in banking, insurance, telecoms, and food industries. Also joining
Okay.
us is Michael O'Reilly, who is CTO EMEA with NTT Data Ireland. Michael has more than 25 years' experience across the banking and insurance industries. Prior to NTT Data Ireland, he was also head of IT for KBC Bank Ireland. So, good morning, gentlemen, Michael and David.
Morning now.
So, as I said, informing our discussion is this piece of research that we conducted in October. So what I'd like to do is bring up slide 2 of that presentation, please, Killian, just to get the ball rolling on our conversation this morning. So, and if you take it to slide 2 there, please, Killian. So, what factors are we looking at that will affect business over the next 2 years? Um, Fairly straight looking dispersal of opinions there. Top of the list being the pace of technological change. Granted, this was a largely tech audience, so this is probably naturally going to be the top concern. However, in second place, we had geopolitical factors, and then a little bit of a drop off into changing workforce dynamics, competitive threats, climate change and natural disasters, and then following that into supply chain issues and health crises, which I think is a reflection of where we are in terms of the post-COVID world, which we'll dig into a little bit when it comes to workplace dynamics. But David, did the spread of answers surprise you in any way?
I think, all these things need to be taken in the context of when the question was asked. And, you know, when we look at similar survey we ran in the US, geopolitical, health and climate were way up top, right? But that was 12 months ago. And I think things were moving. The dialogue was different. If I think now what's top of mind for a lot of people is AI, generative AI, that pace, and that I think has really put reset everybody's expectation around what pace of change actually means in technology. So not a complete surprise to see that top of the list. And what sort of a competitive threat does that then create? Like any survey, you put down the questions and you think, that's kind of the same as that. Geopolitical and climate change and climate change and natural disasters become political very quickly as well. So it's I think the pace of technology change and the impact it can have on business, and I suppose the business conversations that have been driven by the recent leaps forward in Gen AI and what the expectations IT is seeing from some of our business stakeholders. And it certainly doesn't surprise me that has pushed the pace of technology change to the top of this list. What it'll do to competitive environments, what it'll do to our workforce dynamics is potentially significant. And there's certainly a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt around that. It's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to build another level of resilience. If we go back to what we're here for, talking about resilience, the ability to use automation and, if you like, call it digital personas to help us manage capacity in new ways, does provide a different level of business resilience than we've had before. I think that's maybe what a lot of our stakeholders in the business are looking for and asking for. And I think if we look at the advances in automation and AI and what they could do in those terms, rather than just pulling cost out, I think that digital dexterity it can give you, that ability to ramp up and ramp down, to move quickly as the market moves, whether that is because of a competitive threat or a geopolitical issue, and that's impacted your supply chain or your market access. I think those conversations with the business are ramping up. They're challenging people in IT, all of us, to be able to engage.
Yeah, Michael, would you like to chime in on that? I mean, the point of FOMO certainly stands out.
Yeah, I mean, David's on the money. If I'm a barometer of the volume of questions around Gen AI specifically, and traditional AI and machine learning, my inbox is jam packed with, if not a report, a question or a survey or something that's want to know what the impact of this is going to be on my environment. And I think if you look to your vendor landscape and look to the tools that technology used, they're all bringing that capability into your environment. And they're all looking at how they can look at your data and all that rich monitoring information you're putting together, and how to find sort of use AI technology to try and help you come up with better answers to questions you haven't been able to answer before. Give your teams the ability to be able to react to an incident, be able to deal with the data that's represented in a faster way, so you can bring your resolution time down, and self-healing, to be able to use AI to pick the most likely cause and recommend to you what the likely fix could be. All about making your business, get your business back up and running faster.
Yeah, very interesting point there. Sorry, David, you'd like to jump in
Yeah,
there again.
yeah, no problem. No. I mean, there's the opportunity side of Gen AI. There's also the threat side, and I think we're all going to have to up our game in terms of cyber security and threat awareness on this, because the ability for bad actors to move at increased pace is becoming real, whether that's on fraud or whether that's on ransomware attacks or other things. And I do think that drives the resilience question further up the agenda again, which is, with the pace of technology change, are we staying secure? Are we keeping our environment secure? Are our customers protected from other people either trying to pretend to be us or defraud them in other ways? So yeah, I think there's another side to that pace of technology change that will cause concern, which is the ability to make a step change in the sophistication of phishing attacks and the likes, is something that I think is a real concern for a lot of businesses, and the reputational damage that can bring.
And yeah, Michael, just on that point there of security in Gen AI and sophistication of attacks that we're seeing, without sort of going too far down that particular rabbit hole, are you seeing anything that's particularly alarming?
The industry that we operate in, whether it's in financial services or across retail, there's a danger there for everybody. What I have seen that worries me the most is that the bad actors in this world are still capturing all the information, even though they're maybe not using it now, they're preparing for future campaigns. So they treat themselves like a business. They come up with business cases to say, is it worthwhile going after, this attack or not? And they prepare themselves very well. So they're very organized. This is not your couple of guys in hoodies in the basement with a large laptop. These are very sophisticated organizations, What worries me is that your data is not safe. If they can get your data, they will keep it. If it's encrypted, they will try and figure out a way around it. They're waiting for the time where quantum computing will allow them to unencrypt what you believe is your highly secure and highly encrypted data sources and passwords and emails, whatever. And so they have a pipeline that that worries me.
Just moving on to our third slide there, Killian. I think one thing that's always very interesting is to look for reactions and opinions across cultures. And I think on slide 3 there, please. Yeah, we have quite the interesting spread between what's happening in Ireland
Mm.
and our colleagues in the States. Where I think we kind of have to invert what we're looking at because these are
Mm.
looking at negative impacts as opposed to just general impacts, which is what we were looking at. But again, I think we have that COVID and post-COVID effect where the things that indeed were concerning to people are, have certainly the hysteria seems to have died down. I don't know, David, if you would like to take the lead on this.
Yeah, I mean, this survey was probably predates our one by about 9 months, maybe a little more, and it shows a year-on-year trajectory. So if we go back to 2021, pretty much every business was concerned about climate change, change in workforce dynamics, supply chain changes. And in all of that disruption in the business that we had in COVID, competitive threats were alarming because people's businesses, new markets were opened up and new suppliers were opened up into markets because everything was been, everybody was shopping remotely and so on. So we had some significant shift in churn. And what you can see there is it settles through to the following year. Geopolitical factors still very real, technology change still real. But I think maybe there's an element of confidence on the technology side in the US that we don't necessarily see here. Either that or a lack of awareness, but certainly a different priority in terms of the fear factor associated with it. Climate, natural disasters, still a major issue. Competitive threats, as you'd expect, still an issue. Interesting to see workforce dynamics calm down and supply chain actually drop from being major players to ones of also runs. US business environment is different. I think it's when we look at the Irish market, Irish players, we're a very open economy, very open market, a lot of foreign direct investment in here. And I suppose one thing that we didn't do in our survey is try and split the difference between Indigenous and FDI firms in that. Maybe it might have told us something, I'm not sure. But certainly a sense of improving sentiment with these same questions in the US compared to the previous year. And different hot buttons. I think it's interesting to see that they are less concerned about the pace of technology change. Is that because there's less technical debt there? I'm not sure. I mean, technical debt is a big part of the conversations we have with most of our clients. And it poses both a challenge to that agility or dexterity of the business to move and do things because they're difficult systems to change, but also then creates vulnerabilities because maybe, patching and security on those older systems is considered to be higher risk and often is. So it may be to do with the technical environment that the two different sets of respondents exist within. But certainly among Irish clients, technical debt is always fairly close to the top of the agenda when people are talking about risk and resilience. How do I move those big hard points in my technology landscape that legacy systems can present, and that can dictate so much of how a business is run and operates. Where you have constraints in terms of operations, in terms of things like market access, in terms of product mix, but also in terms of downstream and if you want to call it technical supply chain dependencies. You may need to process online payments. You may have one online payment processor. Is that resilient? but does your system allow you to easily bring in a second and have them both run together so you can build in, an active resilience amongst payment processes? These are questions that a lot of Irish businesses struggle with. So I suppose when I look at that and I look at the difference in the main issue in Ireland compared to the US, I wonder, is technical debt a big driver of risk?
Yeah, Michael, just to further explore technical debt, but I suppose a really interesting point to look at also is that sort of lack of concern about workplace dynamics. Does that mean that sort of people have been given the appropriate tools to maintain their productivity?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. I think one thing we all remember from the COVID time was that a lot of digital transformation activities were accelerated during that time. The ability to change how you work, was critical for anybody to survive during COVID and enable your workforce to be able to work remotely, work from home, safely and securely, was paramount to that. It was partly a technology problem to give people the ability to be able to work technically from home, but also it was around the softer side of these things. Their policy procedures in some cases for organizations doesn't allow people to work on data outside of the office for security reasons, for other reasons. So it was a holistic approach. It was legal, it was HR, it was compliance, it was business working together to try and figure out how can we work effectively. And I think what we're seeing now in a post-COVID world is that our organization are now much more resilient, much more robust to deal with crises, whether it's health or tornadoes in Leitrim or wherever it might be. The world is a strange place and it's getting stranger every day. These things are helping us become much more operationally resilient, the ability to be more adaptable, and that's a key factor. And areas we'll touch on later on is you need an adaptable workforce, an adaptable set of IT policies, and we all need to work together to make them all work.
Yeah, David, just to go back to you there on that issue of climate change and geopolitical factors, one you would imagine sort of a greater alignment there given our current state, particularly with COP28 happening. Do you think there's a particular reason for this sort of disconnect, or do people sort of understanding of climate change and geopolitical factors, is it still quite siloed off?
I think in Ireland there's a lot more consensus on the importance of sustainability and climate and the potential impacts of climate. There's a lot less of a large scale political movement involved in climate change denial, right? I think that's a key difference between here and the US, where it's become very polarized and politicized. If I look then back into sort of a more practical basis, I think what the progress that Michael has just referred to over COVID in terms of the resilience of the workforce and being able to get people to work under different sets of circumstances and not been obliged to travel to get to work to become productive. The way we've opened up our networks to zero trust type authentication, where people can work effectively from off-prem, the way customer service applications and customer contact applications have been adjusted so that things like call recording and all the regulatory processes can now be managed while people are working remotely, which is a major issue when COVID first struck, have all helped, I suppose, build more confidence in that. If I look at what's happening, we work with teams in Chennai in the south of India. They had a major weather event, the likes that they hadn't seen since 2015. In 2015, it took about a week for businesses to recover from that weather event and get people back up and running. This time it was, for many businesses, continued straight through it, and other businesses had maybe less than a day of an outage. Even though the actual amount of rainfall and wind speeds and so on, some of the structural damage was as bad, if not worse. You were looking at people waiting around the airport runways, waist deep in water. It was a major event. Yet business continued in a way that in 2015, it just wouldn't have been unthinkable in the similar circumstances. So I think people are hardened, are becoming more robust, in terms of their ability to work. And the infrastructure has improved. And we provide all people up there, all our guys, with 9-hour UPSs at home, right, to deal with short-term power outages and maintain levels of connectivity and productivity. Doesn't cover all eventualities, but it certainly covers off a major one. So I think there is a very keen awareness of the potential impacts of climate change and the political impact of who you can and can't do business with based on and maybe how that's going to change in the future. You know, if we go back to that resilience, you know, one of the things that we're looking at in the banking world is around credit lending. How much of your portfolio is with companies that are now politically exposed due to changing dynamics around sustainability and carbon neutrality and so on. So, you know, many of the vendors on this call will be all too aware of every bid and every tender requires us to have more and more in place around sustainability. That's the same for our customers too, and it's the same for their customers. And, you know, there's a different view on supply chain now that takes sustainability into account, and it's politically driven. It's a it's a political factor that connects sustainability with it. And I think the pressure here is as high, if not higher, than it is necessarily in the US, or the awareness of it.
And again, something that we'll see an awful lot more as the final text of COP28 is
Yeah.
released.
And I mean, the central bank put people on notice. So just to not focus on banking, I know we're going to talk a bit about DORA. Central bank, prior to DORA, put people on notice around the need to have better data around the climate impact of their client base, you know, so that it could be seen where funding was being injected into industries, that people were aware of what that was, you know, and that, you know, if a certain financial institution or trust fund or whatever was pushing significant amount of money, for example, into fracking in a sensitive area, that, well, people want to know about that, and that's something that, you know, needed to be surfaced. So yeah, it's changing, and that again becomes a business resilience issue, you know. Am I going to be able to work with the markets and customers I've been working with previously, or there's going to be a significant change due to the political pressure brought on from climate change and sustainability? This is the type of conversation that can really move resilience conversations out of an IT discussion and right up onto the board level, you know, because it's often from the board level and the reputational level that pressure is coming from. And we can place issues that are, you know, in terms of business resilience back in line with that. And whether it's better understanding of our data taxonomy and who we're doing business with, or whether it's, you know, being able to build that dexterity to move as markets move.
Fortunately, to bring it back to a technical perspective, seeing as we had gone off into sort of a business perspective, Killian, if you wouldn't mind
Guilty
bringing
as
up slide
charged.
5 there. Killian, if we can see slide 5 there, because I think it's quite interesting and something that I think Michael would have an awful lot of opinions on, where we are looking at a breakdown of operational resilience and organizational priorities. I suppose top of the list there, surveillance and monitoring tools. Okay, fair enough. I don't think there's many surprises there. I think the clustering there, when it comes to operation resilience, such as compute, storage, and network, I think that's quite an interesting cluster. Would you like to chime in on that, Michael?
Yeah, sure. I mean, these are interesting, and I think when I was reflecting on these ones, you know, I am quite proud of our industry in Ireland. Like we do the foundational stuff across IT well. We've made the investment over time. So things like how we approach monitoring and surveillance, and how we deal with, you know, disaster recovery, business continuity. Like there's very strong positive note there to say that we're trying our best to do a really good job in that space. Yes, there's areas of improvement. There's always areas of improvement. Yeah, that operation resilience around compute, storage, and network, I guess you could look at it from two different lenses, depending if your glass is half empty or glass is half full. You know, in some instances you might say, we already have fairly resilient hardware. We use virtualization technology and it's not area of concern. On the flip side, you might say we've got more work to do because the demands of our business are asking more, and we need to be able to scale up and scale out faster to suit our business demands and our customer demands. So I think there's two lenses in here, and maybe we're at an inflection point here as we see how far we've pushed what we can do on the on-prem data center. Everybody here is going to be thinking about how is cloud going to play into this, and it requires a change in how your applications and your business processes and your IT flows work, in order to adopt those technologies. And I feel this is somewhat reflective in this response.
Also interesting there is that cluster with updating policies and procedures. And David, I'd like to get your input into this as well. But Michael, your sort of first impressions on this.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was expecting. That, I mean, it's a constant, process to keep your policy procedures updated and moving forward. They should never be static. They should always be moving forward. I mean, it is heartening to see that the majority of the answers are in the top end of the scale. That these are strategic priorities for a lot of organizations. Very important. And less so in the not currently a priority. I think these are important, but I'm not surprised that they're spread out. I think there's always going to be something that's ongoing, and you can never do enough to help strengthen your policies and your procedures to help you make decisions faster and better, especially when it comes to operational resilience. You really want to be able to support your business when they have an event, and not all events are going to be as clear as a building going on fire or a data center going offline. They're going to be much more subtle than that, which requires you to leverage your technology in clever ways to help keep your business running. And that requires good policy procedures to give you the flexibility to do that.
David, from your perspective, from the business end of things, how important is that to keep having that conversation with IT departments to make sure that, the policies and procedures that they're following are aligned with your interests as well?
Yeah, I really separate the two. I think, I think from a practical point of view, a policy is something that we can write and we can inform, we can train people on, we can ensure that that people understand whether it's cybersecurity and data security policies and do's and don'ts, whether it's all the other policies that surround a business, around ethical business and so on. When we come into procedures, I think from a business side, very few BPM tools do what they say on the tin and deliver on the promise, to really provide robust and agile processes. And a lot of them become very quickly additional legacy architecture and additional hard points in your business. So a lot of procedures, when I look around and look at standard operating processes, when I look around at how people, how-tos in their business, they're relying on Word documents, spreadsheets. It comes back to the the very basics of capture, and that stuff is really difficult to keep up to date, and people don't necessarily value it. But I wonder, is it because as soon as you document it, it becomes out of date? And I think there's a real challenge out there from a business perspective to find that piece, if you like, that self-documenting process or self-mapping process where you can if I go back in time, CRM tools were supposed to provide this agility, and then other tools stepped into the place. Some of them, Cordians and Pegas, were around giving you a framework to manage your own processes, but all of them become a real challenge to manage and complete. And I wonder, are people just, I suppose, comfortable to live with that now, and it's slipped off the strategic agenda, and there's far more pressing issues that are driving it, such as the surveillance and the monitoring and management. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think it's one of, if not frustration, maybe resignation in some levels of the business, where we see, the idea of continually documenting processes and how-tos as an overhead, and really as an overhead rather than something that's adding value. And maybe that's an opportunity for us to see, can we actually bring the promise of some of these systems out there whether it be, the many, recent cloud-based offerings that, will harness and shape your business for you, or traditional partners, not, moving in different directions. Salesforce will have ambitions to go here. Microsoft have ambitions to move across and become, your one answer to everything. It's an interesting one, and not one I think that is hitting the top of the agenda in many business discussions. As I say, maybe more down to resignation than a lack of priority.
Yeah, Michael, just to follow up on that, as David laid out the business case, the business perspective, if you will, do you find it a healthy conversation to have from the IT end, or do you feel sometimes it's a case of banging your head against a wall that, constant updates to policies, to procedures, either there isn't an appetite for them, or there's a problem in generating them quickly enough that they will filter upwards?
Yeah, I mean, it's in some cases it feels like a thankless task, and that people say, I know how to do my job, and why do I need to spend time constantly reviewing what I do, and then having to change that and then communicate to that. But I mean, that's the point, that these things are to help you to so you're not having to make the decision on the fly when something goes wrong. Is that those policies and procedures are there to help and protect you,
Exactly.
and keep everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
And they are draw. And having come from industry, and having been responsible for policy procedures across my organization, where I had the most sort of impact was where we had shared policies between business and IT. Because what we manage on behalf of the business is business systems. I never log on to a system to use it to help a customer to achieve an outcome. The business do, but the business rely on me to make sure that that system is available for them, when they need it. If on a 24/7 operation, that's very important. You need to build the policy procedures and the technology and the capability to be able to support that business need and that customer need. And the most fulfilling way to do that is to work closely with your business partners and manage those policies, and own them and review them regularly, and make sure that they're on your agenda and not just something you have to do, but something that you want to do and you need to do.
Brilliant. If we can move on to slide number 6 there, where we were looking at operational risk awareness. Um, let's move it on there. Yep. So again, some very interesting clustering. I suppose let's go straight to the top. I'm comfortable with the level of automation across my organization. Michael, the embrace of automation, we talked briefly about AI, but there certainly seems to be an appetite for it.
No, there is an appetite for it, and if any of the conversation we're having with our customers and internally in our own organization, automation has been a hot topic for a period of time. It's not something new. Um, I'm heartened by some of the responses here. People are taking this seriously. But I think the opportunity to leverage automation more, to take the human out of the equation, and to reduce the potential for manual error, I think is proven, by the use of automation effectively across the organization. So I think there's a similar sort of question in our US survey. Automation adoption in the US has been significantly ahead of what's happening in Ireland, and to a lesser or greater degree in Europe generally. I think we are behind the US in the adoption of automation, and I think it represents a real area for being able to bring a step change into your environment.
Yeah, David, looking at AI as a tool, I mean, it's something that we're seeing increasingly. For example, um, use automatic generated email. Example, has this conversation been had on sort of the shop floor, if you will, or is it still very much how much are we going to have to invest in this? How much is it going to cost us? And is it just a matter of keeping up with the Joneses, or can we actually make this work for us?
I think there's a large level of uncertainty out there, and there's people crying out for some advice. And I've been frustrated myself sometimes talking to vendors and suppliers in this age as to if I put this in, how much is it going to cost me? And they say, oh well, that depends. And that depends is never a great answer when you're trying to build a business case, right? I do think there's a bit of maturity still to come into some of these offers, in terms of understanding how we can put some frameworks around the economics of them. But that aside, in terms of the opportunities that people see with them, I think there is a real engagement, and it's a really positive engagement across businesses and across operational leaders who really see the potential. The potential in this is enormous. And I think we're playing a little bit of catch up from an IT perspective in trying to manage and control expectations, security, and policies as we drive into this. But certainly, when you look at the types of the language generation capabilities of some of these tools, and some of it can be so good and nuanced. You can produce writings in different styles that, given a set of facts, can just remove an editing process. So there's some real excitement and some real opportunity there. But yeah, I think the offers in the background are struggling to get into that commercial space so far, but it'll come. It'll absolutely come. And we can remove some of that uncertainty and some of that, how long is a piece of string type conversations from and allow people to get momentum, the typical story is the more you try to do, the more expensive it's going to be, which makes sense. But it's we've got some very complex tasks that people are looking for in terms of assessing, complex documentation and extracting from it key points and stuff. And just like with people, the more complex the documentation set you put in, and the bigger the library you try to build, the more you burn and churn, and the more expensive it becomes. But the how much more, and that is still a question. But I don't think it's stopping people yet. It is maybe keeping things at an experimental level rather than a full production deployment level. But that's okay too. It's progress, But what it is doing is it is bringing those business and IT stakeholders much closer together, I think, in terms of how we solve that problem, which I think is a really good thing. And it's not just with AI, but the rest of this DORA framework that we're looking at in terms of digital operational resilience is also pulling those stakeholders together, which I think is a hugely positive thing.
Yeah, I suppose it is time to come to the elephant in the room, and what I think a lot of our guests here today have come to learn a little bit more about is DORA, the impact it's having on your clients, and how intimidating, I suppose, DORA is. Michael, starting from the technical point of view, are people coming to DORA from kind of a project management perspective going, I'm going to have to rethink how everything works? Or is it a case of, we probably have the building blocks here, we just have to arrange them in the right order?
Yeah, it's the latter. I think when you step back and look at what DORA has done, it has taken sort of a number of sort of regulations and processes that have been around for a long time around incident management and incident reporting and third party exposures and all the things we do around data protection, and all these things are being reorganized around DORA, the Digital Operation Resilience Act. Focused on financial services, yeah, but its net is now wider than just banking and insurance. It's pretty much a much broader set of industry that is brought in under its banner, and in order to organize them in a way that allows you to, I guess from a definition point of view, if you read their website, their definition is it defines a set of rules for the protection, detection, containment, recovery, and repair capabilities against ICT related incidents. Now, that applies to every organization, financial services or otherwise. Like that's IT shops that run across all industries, whether it's retail, manufacturing, distribution, are all trying to achieve that outcome. So there's nothing new there. I guess what Dora is trying to do is trying to do this, for financial services to put another level of rigor, to really raise our game. To say, we know you do all these things, but we want you now to do this cohesive end-to-end way to understand what the impacts would be to your organization when various events hit them, and how you're going to deal with them, regardless of what those events are.
David, again, coming to things from the business perspective, we've gotten used to GDPR, we've gotten used to Europe being involved in operations. Is this another, oh, for God's sake, Europe have come to ruin the party on us? Or is it, fair enough, these are new rules, therefore they're to benefit everyone, they're to benefit the consumer. Let's just go.
I've generally just seen it as a very positive thing, in that it gives people a channel to funnel their anxieties and their concerns in a way that they feel like they've been noted, right? And it allows the business and the IT to structure a conversation around that in a way that has got will, when this comes together, a more, I suppose, a formal and rigorous framework that legitimizes it as a conversation at a board level. And it really does take that resilience conversation as a point of something that sits firmly on the shoulders of an ops manager or an IT manager or the security guy, and makes it a much more shared concern and objective, and it makes it an organizational issue at the board level. And I think when you think of the components that make up resilience as just being parts of that conversation and part of a much larger agenda, that's everyone's agenda, I think that's a positive thing. It doesn't leave, people holding the can without, the acknowledgement that this is everybody's problem and this is everybody's risk, and it's everybody's business. But it's the resilience of our business as a whole that we need to be looking at. Cybersecurity is a huge part of it. It's a huge part of everybody's concern around resilience. But as we saw, pace of change and changing market dynamics are also resilience issues that people are looking at. IT is seen certainly as part of the answer. Parts of IT are seen as part of the problem. But it does give us that framework to bring it all together and talk about resilience as a broader concept that has a legitimate place on a board agenda, in terms of funding and managing those risks, funding and managing technical debt, funding and managing new capabilities that we want to establish and build to exploit what's coming available through AI and other things. So no, I think it's really positive.
Just a quick comment in the chat there about the sample in our survey that we're discussing. Indeed, it did come from IT professionals across multiple sectors. So I hope that allays some concerns there. Michael, there was a very important word there in David's answer, which was risk. And where there's risk, there's always tolerance. So when it comes to Dora, where does that tolerance exist? Or is it a case of, okay, we park Dora, we know the standard that has to be adhered to, there's no discussing it, but maybe there's an acceptance of risk in other parts of the business?
Yeah, I think that don't confuse, I guess, risk acceptance with risk management. Where large organizations are going to have a degree of risk. There is not a budget large enough, or a team big enough that's going to be able to deal with every single risk that's going to be presented to your organization. So managing your risk is key to helping your business understand what the exposure is. To a degree, you're going to have to, put in some mitigation plans against some of those risks. And, if you're a regulated entity, you're going to have to report that, even in more strongly through the DORA Act, to understand, so you know where the risks may lie, what the impacts to your business will be, and what you're doing to help mitigate those risks. Some of these things will have multiplying effects. So, for example, technical debt in the DORA Act, it's strongly recognized that it's a key risk for all organizations, but where it's positioned within your overall environment will have a multiplying effect on its impact if something happens, which means you need to do more below the line to reduce that risk. And so you look at the risks, you look at exposure, which are your red risks, put in mitigating actions against those risks. Then you got to remeasure your risk. That's the management part. Let's re-score that risk and see what's the residual risk that presents me now that I've taken all the actions I can take. And is there anything else I can do to help mitigate that risk? And that could be, I'm going to review that risk on a quarterly basis, and I'm going to reassess myself every time. The key here is to demonstrate to your auditors and your regulator that you are managing your risks and not just accepting the fact that this is as much as I can do with this and that's all I can do. And I think you'll find a much stronger support from your auditors, from your compliance, and your regulatory people will support you more in the fact that you're actively taking control of your future by actively managing the risks that are in front of you.
Yeah, Michael, just to continue that point, I remember when GDPR came in, it was very much the perspective of, look, there's a regulator, but for the moment, they're more like a consultant instead of sort of a punitary body. When it comes to DORA, are we in that stage? Are we in that sort of, I suppose, soft regulation stage where people are coming in going, okay, let's help out here, and we'll talk about your 2% turnover later.
So, I mean, we're still, the DORA Act doesn't come into effect for at least 18 months now. It may have some minor amendments to it over the next 18 months. Typically, there might be a little bit of extension or a little bit of flexibility around that. But usually, this is the time where it starts getting a little bit harder. Your auditors will start taking a more narrow and laser-focused view to help you to get ready for that. And be aware that anybody who's working outside financial services, your auditors will be looking at DORA and see how it's evolved. Yeah. And don't be surprised when they start bringing areas that are, core to DORA into their audits, over the next 2 years or and beyond. So yeah, you're right, Niall. It has been a little bit softer up to now because it's been a set of guidance and guidelines, which is typical. From a regulatory point of view, is that's what normally happens, and they start getting a sense check of the environment to what people are reacting to this, but it will start to get much tighter, much laser focus over the next 18 months.
David, if you'd like to chime in on that.
Yeah, I mean, they've laid out pretty clearly how they see this being discussed, right, in terms of how you rate one risk or one resilience factor against the other. It starts with your business services and then your processes. It goes down to the IT systems. It includes your external IT dependencies. And then it goes down into your IT controls and your infrastructure controls and so on. And then against that, they're looking at your incidents, your operational risks, your technical debt. And as Michael says, where your technical debt or your operational risk exists within the context of those business services, then points you at something that you need to deal with. I think one part of it is also, things will happen, things will go wrong. There will be breaches. There will be incidents. There will be outages. And it's how well prepared is your business to deal with that. And I think, the healthy view of that is that business and IT have discussed this and they understand that's what's going to happen and how we're going to deal with, an impact or an outage, and maybe even have war gamed some of it compared to the business just throwing their hands up in the air and saying it's all your fault, IT, you've broken it again. You're right. That won't cut it in a DORA world, right? That simply won't cut it, right? The business are much a stakeholder, if not the primary stakeholder in this. They need to be part of those discussions and plans. I think that's positive, and that's really positive because it takes a bit of that silo blame, not my business, it's over there, the problem, into it's our business and these are all the bits that support it. And I can't just say, I can't look at my business services from a DORA perspective without understanding the IT that supports them, and the IT risk only exists within the context of the business services it supports. So it joins them together at the hip. And that, so have been able to lay out your business processes and lay out how they're supported by IT and lay out where the external dependencies are, where your technical debt is going to be key to actually starting any proper DORA conversation. That's going to drive risk conversations going forward, and that's going to be different. I think it's going to be interesting.
I think based on our conversation this morning, then, in looking at that burning question, is organizational resilience an IT or a business issue? I suppose it's a more of a communication issue than anything, David.
I think it starts with communication and a common language, but I think it moves into shared goals and objectives.
Yeah.
But certainly the communication and that common language and that common taxonomy around risk, around resilience, is going to be a part of it. And I think we're going to see conversations align across businesses. It'll be a little bit more formal. But that to me is that's step one. That's step one. Where this becomes interesting and starts to drive things out is when those risk conversations then drive shared concerns, shared responsibility, and shared actions, right? And be that in terms of financing, in terms of preparedness, in terms of how we manage communications with customers and stakeholders in the event of an incident, how we bring them back on board post an incident. These are all the things that build your trust with your customers and your client. And for many of the organizations we deal with, that's actually social capital, or political capital, in terms of how well you deal with significant incidents. And yes, big part of it is trying to eliminate those incidents, but it's also how you deal with them when they happen. Because you'll never, as Michael said, nobody's got the budget or the foresight to avoid an incident that has an impact on their business or their customers.
Michael, is that something you'd agree with?
Absolutely. I mean, I was just reflecting on the DORA. I had some DORA notes down here, and what's important. That one of the areas that they've strengthened in the DORA Act is around testing and training. That training piece is about recognizing that not everybody has the tools to deal with. How do I understand the risk? How do I dissect it? How do I understand the impact of that? And normally they're second and third line activities. So the people at the front line don't get to see it. My best advice to everybody here is to try and embed some of that into your first line, is to give your teams, your business and your IT teams on the ground who are actually trying to deal with these risks and maybe don't realize it, to help them understand risk and help to deal with it, how to communicate it correctly across the business. And because your senior stakeholders, your board and your excos, are looking at this and taking this very seriously now, and they want to help. They want to help you too, because the last they want to do is to be sitting in front of a regulator or an auditor saying that you're not managing risks effectively. So these tools are here to help us better understand what we need to do. And as we're discussing, it's a community problem. It's how do we need to communicate with each other and come up with that common lingua franca that allows us to understand it and give the people at the front line the support they need, and not deal with it just in a second or third line as a problem in the second or third line.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Michael and David. And that's it for TechFire today in association with NTT Data. Of course, thanks again to all our guests and to everyone that logged in to see us this morning. Remember, for daily IT news, log on to TechCentral.ie, subscribe to the Technology Minute newsletter, and of course, you can listen to our weekly podcast, Tech Radio. We'll be back on the 24th of January with Equinix, where we'll be asking the burning question: what's getting in the way of your digital transformation plans? We hope to see you then. Morning.
Thanks, Niall. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.